pans over a bustling school courtyard as students in bright uniforms mingle. Among them, we see Lena, a graceful woman in her late 20s. She is a new teacher at the school. Lena has smooth caramel-toned skin, expressive brown eyes, and braided hair tied neatly with a colorful Maasai bead accessory. She wears a modest blouse and skirt in warm earth tones, accessorized with simple earrings and a Maasai shuka draped over her shoulders, hinting at her cultural pride. Her nervous smile as she looks around the lively scene. A student in the foreground waves at her. Inside the classroom, Lena scans her new students, her eyes briefly landing on Dan, a confident 19-year-old. Dan stands out with his tall, lean frame and sharp features. His skin glows in the afternoon light, and his hair is neatly cut. He wears the school uniform but adds a touch of personality with a bracelet made of colorful beads. Dan's gaze meets Lena's, and a fleeting moment of mutual curiosity passes between them. He seems unusually mature for his age, and his confident demeanor leaves an impression on Lena. One evening after class, Dan approaches Lena with a question about a history project. As they talk, Lena realizes that Dan is not only intelligent but also deeply passionate about education and his dreams. His ambition and sincerity resonate with her, sparking a connection she doesn't expect. Dan speaks with calm confidence, his voice steady yet full of energy. Lena listens intently, her admiration for his maturity growing. Alone in her small, neatly kept home, Lena sits by the window, staring out at the stars. Her thoughts are consumed by Dan. She questions herself. How could she feel this way about a student? She shakes her head, trying to dismiss the thought, but her heart tugs differently. Her cultural upbringing and professional ethics make her feel conflicted. She remembers the advice of elders and her dreams of being a role model. One day, during a school festival, Dan presents Lena with a gift, a beautifully beaded bracelet. He says it's a token of appreciation for her dedication as a teacher. Lena hesitates but accepts it, her cheeks flushing slightly. Her colleagues notice and exchange knowing glances, while Dan seems unaware of the attention their exchange has drawn. One evening, as the school year nears its end, Lena decides to confront her feelings. She asks Dan to meet her near an old baobab tree by the school compound. When he arrives, the air is thick with tension. Lena hesitates, her heart pounding before finally confessing her feelings. Dan listens, his expression unreadable. The suspense lingers as he finally speaks. Before Dan can fully respond, a group of students walks by, their laughter breaking the moment. Lena quickly excuses herself, leaving Dan standing under the baobab tree, deep in thought. The next day, Dan hands Lena a letter saying only, "Please read it when you're alone." Lena's hands tremble as she takes it, the suspense growing. Lena places the unopened letter on her desk and paces the room. Her mind is clouded with uncertainty. What if Dan's response isn't what she hopes for? What if she has crossed a line that she can never return from? Unable to bear the tension, she picks up the letter again but stops herself just as she is about to open it. Instead, she tucks it into her journal, whispering to herself, "Tomorrow." At school the next day, Lena notices that Dan is unusually quiet. He avoids eye contact and speaks little, even during class discussions. The change unsettles her, and she wonders if he regrets giving her the letter. During lunch, she sees him sitting under the baobab tree alone, staring at the horizon as if lost in thought. Lena wants to approach him but holds back, unsure of what to say. Lena starts noticing the whispers among the staff and students. The bracelet Dan gave her has become a topic of conversation. Some colleagues warn her discreetly, while others cast judgmental glances. Lena feels the weight of scrutiny and begins to question her actions. During a staff meeting, the principal speaks about maintaining professional boundaries, though no names are mentioned. Lena shifts uncomfortably in her seat, her heart racing. That evening, Lena finds a note slipped under her door. It's from Dan asking her to meet him by the old baobab tree after dark. She hesitates, but curiosity and a need for closure compel her to go. Under the moonlit tree, Dan waits, holding a small wooden box. He looks nervous but determined. Lena approaches cautiously, her heart pounding. Dan hands Lena the box without saying a word. She opens it to find a collection of items, a small notebook, a photograph, and a carved wooden heart. Dan explains that these are mementos of his dreams and his late mother, who inspired his ambition. He hesitates before adding, "I wanted to share this with you because you remind me of her strength and kindness." His words leave Lena speechless, unsure if his feelings mirror hers or if he simply admires her as a mentor. Before Lena can respond, the sound of footsteps interrupts their moment. A group of students passes nearby, laughing loudly. Dan quickly steps back, putting some distance between them. "I should go," he says hurriedly. Lena nods, watching as he walks away, the box still in her hands. Her thoughts swirl. Was this a gesture of love or simply gratitude? Later that night, Lena finally opens the letter. Inside, she finds a heartfelt message thanking her for her guidance and encouragement. Dan writes about how much she has inspired him, but stops short of revealing any deeper feelings. The ambiguity leaves Lena more conflicted than ever. Her tears smudge the ink as she whispers, "What does this mean, Dan?" The next day, a new figure arrives at the school, a young, energetic woman named Asha, sent by the district to assist with student counseling. Asha quickly becomes popular with the students, including Dan, who seems to enjoy her easygoing nature. Lena can't help but feel a pang of jealousy as she watches Dan laugh at something Asha says. Doubt creeps into her mind. Was she imagining a connection that wasn't there? One afternoon, Asha approaches Lena, her expression curious but friendly. "I noticed Dan seems really close to you," she says. "Is there something I should know?" Lena's heart stops. What does Asha suspect? Is this a genuine question or something more? Lena spends the next few days replaying Asha's words in her mind. Was it just a harmless question, or was there something more behind it? Every glance between Asha and Dan feels loaded with unspoken meaning. Lena's instincts are on high alert, but she tries to remain calm, hiding her growing sense of unease behind a forced smile. One afternoon, she finds herself alone with Dan in the empty classroom. The silence is thick and the air feels heavy with anticipation. Dan seems to be deep in thought, and Lena can't help but wonder if he knows something she doesn't. Just as Lena is about to ask Dan what's been on her mind, he turns to her with a hesitant look. "Lena," he begins, but his voice trails off, unsure of how to continue. Lena holds her breath, waiting for him to speak, her heart racing. He shifts nervously, looking down at the floor. I'm not sure how to say this," he confesses, "but I feel like things are changing and I'm confused. You've meant so much to me, but..." His words are interrupted by the ringing bell, signaling the end of the school day. Dan quickly gathers his things and rushes out, leaving Lena standing in the silence of the classroom. The next day, Asha's behavior toward Lena becomes more pointed. She often asks about her relationship with Dan, speaking of him in a manner that feels almost possessive. The way Asha watches Lena when Dan is around makes her skin crawl, and Lena can't shake the feeling that Asha is playing a game, one she's not sure she understands. Lena begins to notice Asha's subtle attempts to pull Dan into her orbit. She calls him to her office under the guise of offering guidance, but lingers a little too long during their conversations. Dan, who once seemed distant, is now increasingly drawn to Asha's light-hearted demeanor. One evening, as Lena prepares to leave the school, she finds a small note tucked into her bag. It's from Dan, asking her to meet him at the same baobab tree later that night. Her heart races as she wonders what could be so important. She arrives at the tree, but this time Dan is not alone. Asha is with him, and the two of them seem deep in conversation. Lena stands in the shadows, unsure of what to do. She's suddenly overwhelmed with the feeling that she's intruding on something she's not supposed to understand. Lena can't take it anymore. The confusion, the whispers, and the unanswered questions swirl in her mind. She approaches the pair, but before she can speak, Dan looks up and sees her. His eyes widen in surprise, and Asha glances over with a knowing smile. "Lena," Dan says, his voice faltering, "we were just talking about everything." He seems hesitant, unsure how to explain the situation. Asha remains silent, her eyes studying Lena with an intensity that makes her uncomfortable. Lena forces a smile, but inside her mind races. What is going on between them? Why is Asha so involved in Dan's life now? And what does Dan really want from her? The next day, Lena receives a call from the school's administration. A formal inquiry has been launched into her professional conduct due to rumors surrounding her relationship with Dan. She is shaken, feeling trapped in a web of gossip and suspicion. As she sits in the principal's office awaiting her fate, a single thought consumes her. How did things get so complicated so quickly? The man she once thought of as a student, now a young man with his own hopes and dreams, has inadvertently entangled her in a situation she can't control. As Lena walks out of the principal's office, she catches a glimpse of Dan and Asha talking by the school gates. Dan looks at her for a split second, his face a mixture of guilt and something else, something Lena can't quite place. But before she can approach, Asha places a hand on his arm and they walk away together, leaving Lena standing alone. Lena watches them disappear into the distance, her heart heavy with unanswered questions. What will happen next? Will she ever get the answers she needs? Days pass and the weight of the unresolved situation begins to wear on Lena. She cannot continue living in the dark, constantly wondering about Dan and Asha's relationship. With her heart pounding, she decides it's time to confront them both. One afternoon, as she walks to the school courtyard, she sees Dan sitting alone under a tree, his head buried in a book. Asha is nowhere in sight. Lena approaches, her footsteps slow but determined. She stands before him, her breath catching in her throat as she looks down at him. Dan, she begins, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. I need to know the truth. What is going on between you and Asha? Dan slowly lowers his book, looking up at her with a mixture of surprise and guilt. His eyes shift away briefly before meeting hers again. Lena, he says softly, it's not what you think. Dan takes a deep breath and finally begins to explain. Asha and we've been talking because she's been mentoring me in some personal matters. She's been helping me understand the future, my career, things that I don't feel I can talk about with anyone else. Lena listens intently, her mind racing. But why all the secrecy? She asks, the words coming out before she can stop them. Dan hesitates before answering. Because I didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable. You've always been a mentor to me, Lena, and I didn't want to ruin that. I value our relationship, but I also needed to learn more about myself, and Asha helped me with that. Lena's heart sinks as the pieces fall into place. She had been projecting her own feelings onto a situation that was never meant to be romantic. She had misunderstood, allowing her insecurities and doubts to cloud her judgment. I'm sorry, she says quietly, looking down at her feet. I shouldn't have assumed. Later that day, Lena and Asha cross paths in the hallway. Asha gives Lena a friendly yet knowing smile, as if she's already anticipated this moment. I'm sorry for making you feel uncomfortable, Asha says, her voice soft but firm. I never meant for things to get so complicated between us. Lena nods, feeling a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. I just didn't understand, but now I do. Asha smiles warmly. It's easy to get lost in assumptions, but sometimes clarity comes from simply asking the right questions. Lena feels a weight lift off her shoulders as she looks at Asha. The fear and jealousy that had clouded her mind now seem foolish. As the days go by, Lena's perspective shifts. She begins to realize that her feelings were never about Dan or Asha, but rather her own fears and insecurities. The tension that once defined her days at school now fades away, replaced with a sense of peace and understanding. She continues her role as a mentor to Dan, but now with a clearer perspective, free from the doubts that once plagued her. And when Asha approaches her with a new project idea, they work together seamlessly with mutual respect and trust. Lena has learned that communication, honesty, and self-reflection are the keys to peace of mind. She understands that sometimes the hardest thing is not facing what we fear from others, but confronting the fears we hold within ourselves. As Lena walks home that evening, she reflects on the lessons she's learned. It's not about what others think of us or the situations we imagine in our minds. It's about how we approach them. Fear, doubt, and jealousy can cloud our judgment, but only by confronting our own emotions honestly can we find clarity. Lena has learned that assumptions only breed misunderstandings and that true peace comes from open communication and trust in oneself and others. Hope you like this story. Subscribe if you find the story interesting.